Can I ask members if they have any disclosable pecuniary interests in specific items on the agenda?
I have a non-pecuniary interest. Because Justine is here later in the meeting, I'm Cabinet Member for Culture, Leisure, Arts and Sport at Barnet Council, and the reason I'm declaring an interest, and Zoe says this might be an over-declaration, but I'd rather over-declare than under-declare, we received a Cultural Impact Award, although not when I was Cabinet Member. Before I was Cabinet Member, but I just thought I would declare.
We like over-declarations. Minutes. Can we confirm the minutes of the meeting on the 27th of November 2024 to be signed by me as a correct record? Agreed. Thank you. Summary list of actions. Can we note the completed and ongoing actions arising from previous meetings of the Oversight Committee? Thank you. Can I also ask the committee to note the recent action taken by me as chairman under delegated authority in consultation with the deputy chair and party group lead members to agree the letter to the Mayor of London on London's New Year's Eve fireworks event? Agreed. It was noted, but agreed is also good, I'm sure. Thanks. Okay, moving on to our first substantive item on the agenda today. Can I welcome Richard Watts, Deputy Chief of Staff to the Mayor's Office, Ayo Akunde, Assistant Director for Skills and Employment, and David Bellamy, Chief of Staff to the Mayor's Office, to join us for a discussion on the mandates and the selected mayoral decisions. Richard, I don't know, or David, perhaps you decide who is best to kick off on this. Why are the mandates not being published as mayoral decisions as originally planned?
They're not intending to publish them as a mayoral decision because they don't commit expenditure, and so in that sense there's no requirement to publish as a mayoral decision.
So is that a change from how the mandates were originally envisioned, or perhaps how we were led to understand them?
It's not a change from how they were envisaged, it's just we thought a bit more about the publication method, and we don't think we need, as with a number of things, the Mayor can approve it. It doesn't need a formal mayoral decision.
Thanks. And on the wider point around the mandates, obviously the reason that we are having this discussion here today was because it was noted to us in our last scrutiny meeting of mayoral decisions that the mandates were going to be an extremely important part of that process. We were also told they'd be published in late autumn. We'd be told they would be published before the draft budget, consultation budget, and we were also told, even as late as last week, we could definitely expect them before this meeting. So why, and I believe, sorry, I should say that they do exist, they've been approved by a board, so why is it that they haven't been released or we haven't been able to see them?
So the reason they haven't been released is that they're with the private office for the Mayor to read them. The Mayor read a draft of them earlier in the process and provided comments, but he would like to read them finally before they're published, and so that's quite literally where they are at the moment.
Should I, if it's helpful, just to add something to that, which is, as you know, the content of the mandates, I think has been explained, will not be a surprise to anyone who has read the GLA Mayor draft budget document. They are pretty similar, because obviously the content of them isn't a surprise to our officers. We've been working broadly under the steer from the Mayor since the election result to implement the Mayor's policies, and that's largely all the mandates contain. I think so in terms of getting the precise wording signed off, Sadiq feels that these are not board decisions. The boards can make recommendations to the Mayor, but it is ultimately for the Mayor to issue to the GLA, and he understandably wants to read those, read the final text of those before issuing them. I think it's we'd hope to get those out already, but it's not been possible to do so.
And that's why I think perhaps there's some confusion. Is we were told this before and again today that there's not going to be any surprises. It's what we would expect. But also they're not being published, which is confusing, especially when, if I could go back to the comments of the GLA's Assistant Director of Strategy, he said, "This is quite a revolutionary approach within the GLA. I've been at the GLA quite a long time, and it's the first time that we have seen a root and branch review of fundamental purposes of the GLA and how it wants to go about business." We also had David, you telling us in our October meeting that you need to work out how we publish, but you will see an alignment between what the mandates are saying and what the budgets are saying. So now, as we get into that budget period, it seems really quite important that Assembly members can review those mandates, which apparently are no surprise.
Yeah, and as soon as the mayor has had a chance to read them and sign them off, then I will happily send them along.
But we were supposed to see these in late autumn, and it's now, I doubt, are we going to see them before the end of the year?
The civil service astronomers would still tell us it's late autumn, but being serious, like, I don't know, clearly, yeah, we've got mayor's question time to get through. When the mayor I don't know quite what the private office has got for the mayor and how they're prioritising things beyond that, but as soon as he's read them and signed them off, as I say, I'm very happy to share them, and as Richard says, I don't think they're going to be particularly surprising.
Okay. I think that the concern, I think, for members is, we were told as well, Mary Hartley said that the content of these mandates absolutely informs the budget. And so it now looks like we're not doing things, or it feels as though we're perhaps not doing them in the process we would like if we were able to see the mandates now at this point. And
the language from the mandates as they stand, a lot of it was copied, pasted into the budget document. So I do expect that when you see the mandates, a lot of it will look very familiar because there is that alignment.
As a scrutiny body, though, it's less than helpful, especially when we can't get the promise of when they will be delivered to us. The further question I had, or final I should say, is on the format of how these mandates. So they're now, obviously, we spoke earlier, they're not going to be mayoral decisions, they're going to be working documents. What does that look like in practical terms, and is that something that Assembly members can scrutinise, feed into? Are those things, as I suppose the title working documents suggests, they will change over time?
So I don't think we've said they're working documents. I mean, really the point of the mandate comes back to programme management theory and, is about...
Sorry, just to clarify on that, because we had been told they would be considered as working documents. Is there a word or a way in which you would better describe them?
So I think, look, what I would say is refer back to programme management theory, which basically says a mandate is a document that authorises the initiation of a programme. Yeah, and that's what these mandates will do, and then officers will respond to that with proposed mayoral decision in terms of what delivery will actually look like in that area. And what we then need to do is we need to have the right governance around that delivery, including reflecting how things change as the world moves on and there are new developments. So it shouldn't necessarily need to be the case that a mandate which initiated the programme then needs to change, but that's one of the things that we will need to reflect on in years ahead. If there is a programme that has a really significant change in circumstances, maybe there's an unexpected change in legislation or a piece of delegation or whatever it may be, or some external event that impacts the programme, well then, right, what is the proper change management process for that? I don't think it should necessarily be the case that we would need to amend the mandate, but we're talking in theory, aren't we? Because none of these situations have happened yet.
Yeah, and it is quite hard to gain a handle on how they will. Okay, so on the work or the document as published, will there be an opportunity to have consultation or engagement with Assembly members on those?
So absolutely, as I say, as soon as the mayor signs them off, we will send them along. Obviously, colleagues would be happy to answer questions on them, but the more interesting thing is, and it's maybe more one for Richard, is about then how the Assembly engages as the delivery plans come in response, and how we use the expertise of the various Assembly committees there.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the mandate says, let's remind ourselves, effectively the mayor's instructions out to his team about what he wants them to be working on, which, whilst we haven't got the final text of them sent off, the board substance of which you have already seen in the GLA mayor budget. what the response to that are the delivery plans, which will start being published in the form of MDs, because they do actually start to commit money. So an MD is the appropriate forum for that from the new year onwards. So that's effectively officers responding back to the mayor's asks of them, and that I mean. When you say the mandates are documents, they will be Word documents that will be published. Obviously, they will come to you. You can ask whatever questions you want on them. That is absolutely, you're right. I think the most interesting thing, though, is actually then starting to look at the MDs that come back in response to that, because they're the things where officers will set out for mayoral delivery boards and ultimately the mayor's approval about what the GLA will do in response to this. But a lot of that work, as I say, is set out in the draft GLA mayor budget.
Thanks. Assembly Member Mahfouz.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon. So I guess just going back to that point there, Richard, so can we assume that the 14 strategic programmes set out in the GLA mayoral budget align pretty much exactly with what we're going to be seeing come forward?
Precisely, exactly, yeah.
OK, fantastic. So given that then, which way do you feel like the mandates will improve the way that the GLA works, or is it just a sort of reprioritisation project? No,
I think that's a really good question. So this will be about the fourth or fifth time I've said to an assembly committee or other. When I came from being a borough leader, my overall reflection on the GLA was that for London's strategic authority, and I think I'll come on to say something more about that in a second, that the way we do business was often we did a lot of small things. We don't often, I think, live up to that role as being like the shaper and strategic convener of what we do. The GLA mayor budget, as I've made a point to all of you before, is quite small, but our power as an authority to bring people together, to convene change, to make strategic impact across London is much bigger. I think we have been overly focused in the past on delivering small projects, and we've had staff expertise that has gone into project delivery. Many of those, I think, haven't had the kind of strategic impact that we need across London. So, for example, if we were talking about the mayor's ambition to end rough sleeping, then there is an element of project delivery for the GLA to do around all of that, around procurement of specialist services that are best done once across London, because you're talking to a very small group of high needs people, where if a borough individually did it, you'd be like commissioning a service for one or two families, which isn't efficient. But where actually the GLA, as the white paper again on Monday asserted, the city's strategic authority gets to shape a system, gets to understand how boroughs spend their money, how sub-regional partnerships spend their money, how government spends their money, and we're the point where all of that comes together. So if we want a single system in London to end rough sleeping, we drive that. And I think we'd had the mayoral decision process had led to sign-off of projects, fine, and proper scrutiny over that and good use of money and all the things you would absolutely expect. It never allowed us to sit back and think, what the hell are we trying to do here? What's that strategic approach? And that's ultimately what we've been trying to do with this whole governance process, which is particularly needed, I think, at a time when we know that there is the white paper set out a very, very clear role, I think, for strategic authorities. It was published on Monday, and I think the GLA needs to properly think through what it means to do that job in a city as big and complex as London.
So this is very much about making sure that the organisation and every penny that gets spent is focused and ensuring that those key objectives that we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, so that's exactly it. It's to give us both. And this is to a degree what we use the MDB committees for, is to provide kind of support and challenge to the officers designing those programmes to make sure that we're doing the right thing, that we're showing value for money, that we're confident we can get the right results, but also that we're acting at the appropriate strategic level.
So at the moment, in terms of the paperwork that's currently for sign-off on the mayor's desk, is that just the broad objective that we're, the mandate, or is there an element of scope, what's in and out scope within those objectives?
No, I think there is they're broadly, a set of things like, I would like you to do this, this, and this. I've got these manifesto commitments. I've got this is the kind of space I would want the GLA to be in, to do that strategic objectives, and it then broadly sets out the current budget available for that kind of work, given as we've already discussed at Budget and Performance Committee, the kind of budget we're going to have next year is broadly similar to the budget we've got this year, but that allows us to start then and trying to understand where we're getting bang for our buck. But the aim of that was to get office to do that, sitting back and thinking what is actually is to understand how we can, as an organisation, take that strategic approach rather than just embark on a whole series of projects, valuable as they often are.
And often with these sorts of projects, so effectively what you're saying there, Richard, is that this will be the starting point, understanding how much money we've actually got allocated behind each mandate is going to be that starting point that then helps shape, is that the right amount of money in that particular area? Is it being as well spent? Could it be sitting somewhere else? Is there overlap?
That's exactly. I mean, ultimately, that's set by the GLA's budget, which is why there had to be the link through, which there has been. Even though we'd hope to be in a position where these things would now be in the public domain, where I appreciate it would be all clearer. But the kind of process behind it is still working fine.
So you talked about the delivery plans. They're going to come afterwards. What's the timescale for that?
I think the first ones are going to be ready very early in the new year. I don't want to put a precise date on it so we don't get into exactly the same thing as well. But, like first couple of months of the new year. And they are going to be in the first of MDs because they do. So the mandates don't spend money because they're asking the GLA to come up with solutions to problems. The delivery plans which come back with those solutions do allocate money, and that's where they need to be MDs.
Effectively, they're project plans, so they'll have a project.
There'll be a number of projects within them that tries to add up to something more than the sum of the parts.
So you have a total budget that sits under that.
And that's broadly already set out in the GLA Mayor budget document.
Yeah, fantastic.
And if that needs to change in light of changing events, we would just use normal budget variation processes to manage that.
Brilliant. That's really helpful. And in terms of the development of the mandates, can you just talk us through how they've been developed, how we've got to this point?
Yes, certainly. So it started off with officers being asked to do a first draft that came to the Mayor's office, and then ultimately the Mayor for review. The Mayor had a number of comments and all of that. At that point, in truth, we then hit the statutory budget cycle. Effort rightly went into delivering our statutory obligation to deliver the GLA Mayor budget on time. Post the budget being at least out in the public domain, and the work already starting on how officers respond to the Mayor's mandates through the delivery plan, because all that had effectively been set out in the public domain through the budget already, then it had become clear to us that actually the mandates, whilst the substance of them was largely agreed, the precise wording hadn't been. So we had another look at them, tried to further simplify them, tried to take out any effort to move into drafting solutions in there, because we were very clear about what the purpose of all of this is, and after they got rewritten at that level, they're now back with the Mayor for final sign-off.
Yeah, so they're very much outcome-based rather than the process which comes afterwards. And you've talked about the Mayor obviously reviewing it. You've talked about them in terms of other people being involved. Can you just tell us a bit more, expand on who those stakeholders have been in terms of shaping and bringing those forward?
So this would primarily be an internal. So the mandates, at least, has primarily been an internal GLA process, because this is ultimately about the Mayor's instructions to his team, and whoever is elected Mayor in the end gets the ability under the GLA to issue those instructions. So the stakeholders were senior staff who obviously use expertise, was consulted on the key Mayor's office staff, the Mayor's policy and delivery unit, had a lot of kind of work to do to bring those together, and then ultimately Mary and her senior management team shaped that. The Mayor looked at it, went through the budget process, and now it's the Mayor's policy and delivery unit and the kind of senior managers who are then reshaping those to get them into the position they are now in. Where the response to those is different, though. That is where the GLA is talking a lot to the London councils and the boroughs, to other key stakeholders. So when we're coming back with a project, with a kind of programme in each of those areas, that is something that has got that kind of wider buy-in, because ultimately that's what the Mayor is asking his team to deliver.
So that's ongoing at the moment, effectively?
Yeah.
Yeah. And presumably that will at some point have an impact on staffing, how they're staffing within the GLA and how the partnerships develop?
Yeah, logically that's right, but you forgive me on a staffy matter. I'm not going to provide examples of that. I mean, the reality is, given our current financial position, that we're starting off with what we've got, and that's not going to change at least for the next financial year. So people have to plan practically. It is worth saying, I think, that the nature of the size of the GLA budget in many of these areas is far, far smaller than you would need to meaningfully deliver programmes that touch the lives of every Londoner. Therefore, actually, much of this is about understanding what we do and how that adds enormous value to what others do, but how we can do that kind of more convening rather about shaping the London system response to the challenges that Londoners face.
Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Georgiou.
Thank you, Chair. Having gone through the government's white paper on Monday, there wasn't too much on London, but the one thing that they did highlight was that, we have unique arrangements, and those are a good thing. I don't think anyone could disagree. No government has really messed around with the uniqueness of our arrangements. In your submission for the white paper, or possible future submissions, did you present anything about the mandates?
No, I mean, they're an internal GLA governance thing. I'm not sure we'd ever want to particularly bother the government with them.
No, but it could add to our uniqueness and possible learning exercise for other combined authorities or metro mayoralties. I genuinely don't mean this flippantly. I mean, I don't know if you took it to the table as anything of interest to the government.
I mean, thank you. I think what I would say is that we do have a relationship through the M10 with the other combined authorities, and certainly, as ever, as things play out, we're always very happy to share our learnings, both good and things for improvement, and that will apply to this initiative as well.
It's also worth saying, though, and I think, talking about the uniqueness of our arrangements, the biggest uniqueness of our arrangement is that there is a mayoral body with a staffing that goes beyond the kind of very skeleton staff that mayoral combined authorities have, when almost all of their work is delivered by the pooled efforts of senior borough officers in their respective boroughs. So the GLA is in itself unique. The Assembly is unique. I think it's a model that works, personally. I know that there's been some question about that, but I think that the uniqueness of London, because London is not London's devolution came from a referendum of London as it came in the same tranche as Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. Then we've always had a stronger basis for the devolution settlement here, and I think it's also what we're talking about when we talk about London's unique arrangements as well, because we're all here because we are mandated to be so in incredibly detailed primary legislation in what was, I think, the third or fourth longest Act of Parliament when it was ever passed in the Government of London Act. So a lot of that, I don't think it's in anyone's interest massively to revisit, and B, think that actually what we have got works, and as mayors get more, the government is pretty clear the direction of travel is for mayors to get more power. More mayors are going to end up with needing something like a bigger staff to deliver their agenda.
Thanks. Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you. So I just want to pick up on a few things that have come up during the budget process on mandates, because we've learned that the mandates will have a delivery plan, which is expected to be a live document that changes over time. We've also been told by officers that the delivery plan will not necessarily be published, and now we've just been told by you that you're expecting the delivery plans to be published early in the new year. So I just wondered if you've got any comment on that. There's quite a lot of we're just getting quite a mixed picture, but also exactly what within a delivery plan what will we actually see to scrutinise? So
appreciating that some steers have changed, and to be honest, Assembly Member, that is just genuinely reflective of there being a learning process. There's not a conspiracy about that, but actually just as you try and you design a process, you run it for a bit, you change it, stuff goes on. I think we are very clear that delivery plans have to allocate GLA resources. There are proper channels to do that through, which is mayoral decisions, which get scrutinised in the various ways. and that therefore having what a delivery plan MD looks like, I think, is broadly the kind of scope of work in it across a programme area, the big projects that gets allocated to, the kind of theory, the kind of theory of change that we are working to as the GLA for how we use whatever resources we have in that area in order to kind of get the strategic change for London we want, and then kind of headline allocations of funding to each of the projects within it, because that's the thing we statutorily have to do through the MD process. So that should give everyone all the information they need in order to actually try to both understand what we're doing in an area and understand how much money we're planning to spend on the constituent parts of it.
Mm-hmm. And so the mandates and the delivery plans, how do they sit alongside the sort of statutory strategies that the GLA and the other bodies publish? I'm thinking about the Mayor's Transport Strategy, the Environment Strategy. Those are statutory policy documents with targets and things which has underpinned Assembly scrutiny. So do you see the mandates and how do you expect a body like the Assembly to weigh the strategies against what's in the mandates and the delivery plans?
Okay, so being frank, the strategies were a very new Labour Nick Rainsford 1999 way of doing things, because that's when he mandated the GLA to have all these things in the ludicrous level of over detail that was in the 1999 GLA Act. I think the mandate should set out the strategic approach of the GLA to a particular area. Sometimes it is therefore worth, in the very, very limited staff time and capacity we've got, updating strategies to reflect that. But at times, frankly, it isn't, given very few of those strategies actually have any statutory teeth. And I think it is questionable, therefore, the utility of putting staff time into updating a toothless strategy versus actually getting a bunch of stuff done for Londoners. And so where we have so I'm just being completely frank, where we have so that the mandates will effectively update on the GLA strategic work. They will not, they will not read like a statutory strategy, like traditional public sector strategy document. They'll be a lot shorter. They'll be a lot more direct. I think they'll probably be a lot better off for that. But where we've got, where there are differences to that, like the London plan, which both does have significant teeth and has a very particular place, then obviously it becomes a very, very powerful delivery tool for our policies. Where we have other stuff, to be honest, the question is what's the utility of updating it versus, for our limited staff capacity, versus doing other work.
So so are you saying then that anything that isn't in the mandates and delivery plans that's in the strategy documents is being dropped? I mean, I'm so obviously transport is, close to my heart. There are some really key targets that the Mayor has and strategies in the Mayor's Transport Strategy that we have been holding the Mayor to account on. And so are you expecting us then to look at what you've got in the mandates and the delivery plans, and then if there's something that is in a strategy but isn't in the mandate and delivery plan, are we expected to assume that that's been deprioritised?
No, I think I should reassure a bit, Assembly Member, the strategy still exists. Things like the Mayor's Transport Strategy is vital because it is legally it is the instructing document for TfL in terms of what they do. What I think you'll see, particularly when we get to the transport-related parts of this, is actually it's a way of saying, how do we work together as a GLA group to deliver on some of the concrete areas that are in there? And the Mayor's really saying, right, these are particular areas that we need that pan-GLA group and wider focus to deliver strategic change. There will be many other things in the Mayor's Transport Strategy that TfL will be able to carry on implementing, and as a big capable organisation, they can do that. But these will reflect some of the areas where really trying to bring the GLA group and wider partners together to deliver strategic change would benefit from this real focus.
And when you say wider partners, do you mean Londoners broadly, or do you mean partners like local authorities and NGOs and groups that the GLA works with?
Yeah, I generally meant it in a sense of organisational convening.
Because one of the things about the strategies is that they have been very engaged, Londoners were very engaged in the process of producing those strategies. And, Londoners, I know it's only some Londoners, it's not all Londoners, have a sense of what's in the Mayor's transport strategy, but it does affect people's experience of what our city is like. So I'm just wondering, do you see that piece of engagement, which is what the Assembly actually is part of, that liaison with Londoners and bringing Londoners' voices into the scrutiny of what happens here at City Hall? Because these seem to be quite slimmed down, and I can see they're probably much more powerful mechanisms for delivery, and I can see all the sort of governance points around it. But I'm just trying to look at what we might lose, and I'm just wondering sort of how you see that engagement with Londoners on the mandates and delivery plans.
I mean, I think what I would say is that the particular programmes are about delivering particular things that should be entirely consistent with mayoral strategies and the Mayor's election manifesto. And in both those processes, in terms of the strategies and also the mayoral election, there's been a great deal of engagement with Londoners on that. So, I don't think the change is there. The change is really saying, right, how are we actively organising ourselves to focus on delivering some of these things, and so it is absolutely doing that. And I think there's a very fair question in that, which is we need to say, right, okay, if in this particular programme we're going to do activities X, Y, and Z, right, how do we design those things? Because I adhere to what the Chancellor of Duchy of Lancaster said, was it last week or the week before, I forget now, about the need to try things, to learn, to evolve. And, it's how we involve partners, Londoners, in that process, based on what it is.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then just one final follow-up. Do you still expect to produce 18 to 20 mandates overall?
So, we actually, I think it will be just is it 21 that we're currently shooting at? I think the number.
Okay.
Including the ones that are more TfL or safety led.
Yeah, and so in terms of the wider organisation and how these get used by your programme delivery boards, wider organisation, and the mayoral delivery board, they're the kind of the organising documents that enable everything to happen.
That's right. Yes, what they are, they inform then also the kind of the statutory documents like the budget, like some of the strategies, and so on. So that should all work together. They should also effectively then allow us, whether it's the Mayor's office, Assembly members or others, then to start saying about, well, actually, how are you doing against the ambitions that we set ourselves at the beginning of the term?
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And Richard, I'm just reminded of a scary proposal for you, not for us, that you were going to chair a lot of these subcommittees. Is that still the plan, that of the 21 mandates you would chair them all?
So no, there's six. So I don't chair the delivery boards. That would be both kind of physically impossible and actually that's quite right that is paid service officer led. I chair the 6 mayoral delivery board committees that look at much broader areas of the GLA's work.
So the mandates will have, you won't be having to arrange.
We're using the word mandate and delivery plan too much. Each programme that's part of our work. So the mayoral delivery board is responsible for the portfolio of work. It, through the mandates, establishes a number of programmes. As we say, we think there are going to be 21 of those. Yeah, it's not, I think we touched on this last time, it is not practical for Mayoral Delivery Board to get into the detail on 21 programmes, and therefore it has established a number of committees to do that on its behalf and report back. And so it's established 6 committees which the programmes will be divided amongst, and then, yeah, they will oversee directly the programme boards, and then that will come up in turn to Mayoral Delivery Board at portfolio level.
Thank you, that's helpful. And I, at this point, like to thank you for sitting so patiently for the last half an hour. Hopefully you will be involved in the conversation, well, or maybe not hopefully, I don't know. But, no, you will be involved in the conversation now. And we're moving on to scrutiny of some mayoral decisions that you'll have seen in advance. Firstly, we're going to take a look at the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, People and Skills Grant Awards and the London Careers Hubs, and Assembly Member Mahfouz is going to lead off.
Thank you, Chair. Good to see you again, Io. So soon after the last time, so great. Having obviously been on the borough side and been the lead for this particular area, and having, in terms of sort of submitted for funding for this previously, can you just tell us a bit about, in terms of what the expenditure, the £1.369 million of UK SPF funding will, how that's going to be spent? That's set out in the decision.
Yes, I can do that. Thank you, Assembly Member. Can you hear me?
Yep.
In the decision, the 1.3 or close to 1.4 is actually part of a bigger program, the Careers Ops program, which has been running for quite a few years. That particular decision was asking for part of the UK SPF People and Skills Fund to supplement into that program as well. So in front of me, for the academic year that extension relates to, if I could quickly find that, the total spend for the program for 24-25 is actually 3.7 million. So 1.4 is part of the 3.7 million, if that helps. We do have, on a yearly basis, for past few years, we do get match funding from CEC, which basically drives that program, funding from DFE, just to be clear, routed via Careers Enterprise Company. So in that 3.7, the balance of that is funded by CEC, which creates, it's a national program, the Careers Up program. They've got a framework that we're working towards. London came into that framework of delivery later than other parts of the country. So at the moment we're doing catch-up, which is why one of the other reasons why we sought extension or complementary funding from the UK SPF to be able to do a lot of other things that allows us to catch up with other part of the country where the careers program was already running. So
just to clarify, Io, you're saying this is match funded, so actually for every £1 that's been signed off here, we've received a further £1 from...
It's not one-to-one funding, but yes. So I'll go again. See, the total program for 24-25 is 3.7 million. The CEC part of that is 2.2, and therefore the program you're looking at, the MD you're looking at, is the balance of that match funding, which is 1.4.
Okay, brilliant. So a far better ratio than 50-50,
yes,
yeah.
Yes.
And then what's the aim in terms of extending the careers hubs as part of this programme?
Well, as I said, the program was running previously, so without knowing mayoral election, national election, and national government priorities, we decided that to extend the existing program. The program is set up in such a way that it's fundamentally around capacity building. So this is, just to be clear as well, this is funding volunteers to go into schools across the country. We're working with about 700 schools across, across London. And the aim is that you help to improve careers education in those schools. So that's what that funding is about. At the moment, we're set up across the 4 sub-regional areas. So there are 4 career hubs laid out across London, particularly working with the schools in their network. And the idea will be enlisting volunteers, enlisting employers, and working with the national framework. And the quality standard is called Gatsby Benchmark, which is a national framework as well, which you are using to test how careers education is done in the schools as well. Where GLA then comes in there is to make sure that we can build consistency across all the schools, across all the networks. Also to then make sure that we can align to any other careers or young people's program, or even more widely, other types of program that we have levers over in the GLA as well, so that we can build a holistic program out of that. Yeah, that's where the match funding is going to as well.
Brilliant, thank you. We talked quite a bit at the plenary most recently in terms of measuring outcomes, objectives from the programme. What are you hoping in terms of achieving from this funding? So the first one is just improving the Gatsby benchmark. As I said, London started later in the programme. So, yeah, if you compare us to somewhere like Greater Manchester, in some of the benchmarks, we're quite low. But good enough, we have been improving a lot. If I just give you an idea, I've got 2 examples here in front of me. So in GBM, let me just say Gatsby benchmark 5, which is around student encounters with employers and employees. We have made progress since the start of the program from 51% to 64%. And this is a national data, just to be clear. And this year, with the funding that we've got in front of us, we have actually reached 80%. Now, very close to our target of 83%. We're not there yet, but you can see that we are really just almost there now. And that's on one example. And then another example is benchmark 6, which is measuring students having experiences of workplaces. And we have increased from 38% when we started to 55% last year, and currently the current position shows 67%. Again, we're not there yet, but our target is just 70% on that benchmark. So there's a lot of work that we're doing through the OBS that we've commissioned out to be able to meet those benchmarks. So that's the primary outcome as far as our funders are concerned. So you've referred there to a couple of national indicators which you're using in terms of both benchmarking and obviously very close to your target in both those areas to ensure that young people have those real life work experiences and also that connection with employers going forward. What would happen if we didn't have the UK SPF funding?
So since the program has started, because it's one of the priorities for the mayor, young people, as you know, and Richard may well come in as well at that point, we've been opportune to have this conversation. So there's always been funding. CEC expects match funding. This is how they're trying to build sustainability into the program across the country. And so because it's an expectation, we always go back to Mayor's office, we always go back to Mayor to have these conversations. And you've seen the MD, we previously had ESF to be able to tap into, we previously had core funding to be able to tap into, and then when the opportunity of UK SPF came, we were able to get that as well, once UK SPF criteria fit into that. So there's always an opportunity to have a conversation. So if there is no UK SPF going forward, we'll go back again to the drawing board to think about, it's basically based on how much money we've got additionally to complement what CAC gives us that allows us to be able to meet our outcomes properly. I don't know, Richard, if you want to say any more on that.
Sorry, just before you come in, Richard, I guess, could you also expand on maybe what the impact would be if we didn't have the UK SPF?
I would defer to IO on the technical impact on this particular programme. And broadly, UK SPF has provided some valuable funding, albeit within too tight ring fences, and some of the bureaucracy that went with it was actively unhelpful. Obviously, we have now got our allocation of UK SPF funding that arrived a few days ago. Given it's only just arrived, no decisions have been made yet about how it's allocated. What is important to say about that, though, is clearly whilst this money comes to the Mayor and the GLA to be the accountable body for, it is important pan-London money. The majority of it was actually spent by boroughs and sub-regional partnerships rather than the GLA in the last 3-year round. So we would want a bit of a conversation with partners across London before we announced a solution to that, because we are committed to working in partnership with other levels of London government.
And if there was no UK SPF in current year, we'll be limited in terms of staffing resource, in terms of the capacity and the size. And as I said that in my intro, because we're doing catch-up, it was almost timely that we had enough to build that. So if there was no UK SPF, there will be less. We still have GLA core funding, but it's much, I think is a third of that. So the impact will be less. And possibly we won't have got to 80% in that target, for example, because the staffing, it is basically driven by the staff that is employed by the hubs to do the work.
So it sounds like it massively impact on the employability of our next generation going forward if we didn't have, because the figures have so significantly increased in terms of the impact on young people. If we didn't have that to the same degree, it would massively impact on their employability.
We will, yes.
Yeah. I hear, I mean, he's not here today, but plenty about Brexit benefits. I'm sure we could list a load today, but I just wanted to ask in terms of how the UK SPF People and Skills funding compares to the previous, and you talked about ESF. For those who aren't aware of that, of course, is the European Skills Fund.
Social Fund, yeah.
Social Fund. So how does that compare to the EU funding streams in terms of the UK SPF that we have at the moment?
At the moment, or in current year, well, I don't think it's a surprise. UK SPF allocation is lower than what we had previously on ESF. But having said that, just to be clear, there are also other funding that is going into, not necessarily into one pot, so not from government to ESF, to UK SPF, for example. There's other funding from DWP that are doing similar things to reach vulnerable people of different categories, economically inactive, NEET, young people. So it's quite difficult to say easily UK SPF is less than ESF, if you see what I mean in that regard, because they're quite doing different things, if that makes sense. Richard, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, just to say, I mean, clearly any funding is valuable and we do our best to use it well. Where we're very clear that this is without repeating what I said at the Budget and Performance Committee, we're in a kind of one-year settlement world at the moment, and what the world coming out of the CSR looks like is, a series of kind of active debate and discussion, particularly post Monday's white paper. And the kind of the further references it made to an integrated settlement, which is for areas getting an integrated settlement, where will this funding would be moved into. But it's also, as Io said, there are some tactical. If the GLA gets an offer, and to slightly go back to the previous conversation, if the GLA gets an offer of matched funding for a thing we think is valuable, there's then some tactical decisions made about what's the best source of funding to match it. Tactically, UK SBF was chosen, but a broadly similar service was provided with two other different sources of match funding. And at that point, across quite a large amount of funding in the skills world, you start to kind of mix and match your funding sources, and you start to kind of understand where impacts hit, because the benefit of operating at the size we operate at is you do have some choices and some options around all of here. So I think it would be wrong to assume that with that because something currently gets UK SBF funding, that's the only source of funding it in future.
Thank you. You talked, last question, yeah, absolutely. So I think you talked a bit about the NEETs and economically inactive, and actually with both those, obviously, again, there was ESF funding attached to that. Within the mayoral decision, it states that the assistant director, so yourself, Io, will get to approve any additional funding that comes forward. Richard, you've talked about, obviously, whether that's in the short-term or longer-term funding. So just clarify, will that need another mayoral decision when that funding comes through, given the importance of how that's distributed and allocated? And just part of that, how will you factor in, we've heard a lot about economic inactivity impacting the labour market, so how will that be factored into future funding streams? I
think you might be talking about three things or even more, but I'll pick up some of that. So the delegation in the MD specifically was for the overarching MD, was for the overarching funding, so not for new funding. So that's first thing to say. For new funding, possibly Richard will pick on that. That will be a new, there's always a requirement for a new funding when a new MD, when a new funding is to be received by the GLA. So that's something that Richard can pick up on. And then thirdly, on funding more widely for economically inactive, we had a couple of weeks ago with the Get Britain Working white paper, trailblazer announcement for some amount of money coming into to London. We estimate it may be about 30 million, but nothing certain yet. From DWP to support that group, both on the economically inactive and NEET as well. That will require a new MD to receive that funding and to decide how to spend the funding.
Thank you. If we could move on to the termination of the London Aerospace and Technology College project, affectionately known as MD 3042. Just wanted to know more, Io, what was that project? Or what did it wish to achieve?
Well, I wouldn't possibly do justice to it because it was set up before my time. But this is one of the Skills for Londoners Capital Programme, a couple of other projects in that same range. But this was setting out to have a new construction, basically, for the London Aerospace and Technology College. So I won't go into any more detail. However, when that was set out, there were some conditions for it to be met for funding, and therefore the provider made some expenditure to be able to do some feasibility studies and pre-build consultancy work, which is expected in this capital project, and therefore they made some expenditure. From the feasibility study, it became clear that the projects as was concepted at the time would not be visible. So therefore, they looked at other options to be able to spend that money. And again, it was also subject to certain criteria to receive funding from DFE. They made an application to the DFE for a new scheme which was developed. But unfortunately, DFE didn't give that much funding for the new scheme. It was at that point we took to LIPIC at that time, LIP Investment Committee, which was chaired by Jules Pipe, to have a think about how to claw back and stop the scheme as was proposed at the time. So that's the history, basically, that I can give you, Assembly Member.
Okay, and let's talk about the figures, because they're why this is important, really, is because the initial contract was valued at 6.396 million, so basically 6.4 million. And as it stands in our papers today, there's 0.856, so 850 grand that we may have lost or we may have back. Do you have any ideas, or Richard or David, how much that money has been clawed back or if it is all gone?
Well, clawback, interestingly, has just started because there were some negotiations that needed to happen with the finance team of the school, with our finance team, as well as with legal as well. So the first payment will be in December, and there was an arrangement for us to claw it back over a period of time with the provider.
So are we now at a position where we expect to claw back the entire amount? No,
not for the entire amount. There was a subsequent decision following a series of negotiation where a further amount was given back to the provider in acceptance of the fact that they did the work that was needed. Again, that's not uncommon in capital schemes. For pre-build work to be done. We just needed a series of negotiations and discussion to establish exactly what costs will be acceptable to the GLA, to the finance team, to legal as well. So once all that has been done, we've established an amount that is clawed back from this amount.
And what is that?
That's about 300,000.
300,000.
Which, just to be clear, is a line which they match principle of the entire scheme that was set up when the project was set up. So basically, we said they cover a particular amount and we cover a particular amount because that was a matching principle in the scheme. Okay,
so the GLA, or London Assembly, Mayor of London, definitely has lost 500,000, £500,000. Richard, David, is there any kind of lessons learned from that can be applied going forward?
Two things come to mind. One of which is you would always want to learn lessons about projects like this if there was things that could have been done in conversations. You know, this project was started some time ago now. The broad point I would also make on everything like this is we talked about 15 minutes ago about the importance of every so often experimenting and trying some stuff, and sometimes it doesn't work. Every so often, sometimes something doesn't work, and you get into positions like this. You know, if you only did some things you knew would be 100% successful, you would never try anything new. So there has to be a role for experimentation in places.
£500,000 is an expensive experiment, though. I think Londoners would probably agree. So that is why hopefully there has been some lessons learned from this project that didn't get off the ground. My final question on the decision, on the publication of this mayoral decision, obviously taken in February 2023 and then not received until about 18 months later. Was that because of all the discussions, IO, that you've just... so you can just say yes.
Yes, I'm not on top of exactly how long, so it's good to know that you've calculated it to 18 months. But yes, that's the principle.
Okay, thank you. Right, moving on to the fire and rescue staff 2024 to 25 pay settlement. Sorry, you did tell me you were over there.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to be asking Richard the questions on this. It's the pay settlement that has been worked through with the unions. Just a couple of questions. Is this in line with the mayoral decisions, strategies and mandates to have that kind of pay settlement? Was that something that
I'm afraid this is absolutely nothing to do with my area of work, so I might have to...
I realise that, but you were a member of the board. You've okayed the decisions that went through, so you must have been part of those conversations that were in the room at that time.
So this is a Deputy Mayor for Fire decision. It's a delegated decision taken by the Deputy Mayor for Fire. As it says on it, and I happen to have a printout, so I'll turn to it. A summary of this decision was reviewed by the Mayoral Delivery Board on 28th October, which essentially will probably be fairly similar to what the executive summary was. And so if any members of the Mayoral Delivery Board had any questions or concerns, they will have been free to raise those. Coming back to your original question, which was about, while we are... for GLA programmatic expenditure, we're introducing this new portfolio management approach. That doesn't change in any way the GLA's governance and decision making about other matters, and so it has no impact at all.
Okay. I mean, I do have an additional question. As Richard was there as part of the member of the board, and I do hope you can at least remember that there was a concern about the fact that staff on higher grades would be receiving more money than those on lower grades. That means that there'll still be an existing pay grade issue. And within that meeting, which is in the documents, which is public, actions were agreed to deal with that pay gap. Can you discuss what those actions are and share that with the committee?
No. It's not my job. B, the job of the Mayoral Delivery Board is to note the decision made by... That's our job, is to note the decision made by the Deputy Mayor in line with his statutory responsibilities. It's certainly not our job to second-guess industrial relations negotiations between the senior management and the LFB and their staff.
Okay. Well, I'm disappointed that you can't even just say that there was a discussion, that there are plans in place to make sure that there is a approach to make sure that pay structure is discussed in terms of equality and fairness, and I would have thought that the Mayor would want that to happen.
I think you've misunderstood the decision with respect.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thanks. And Richard, David, I would remind you, we are letting you know the mayoral decisions that we'll be discussing in advance, so you can affay yourselves with those, being those representatives from the mayor's team. So I think it's fine to have a mayoral
decision, Chair.
No, thanks. Can I finish speaking? And if it's a delegated decision that's been before the mayoral board, David, I would bring that under that bracket as well. So just ask that an answer can be given. It may not be the most fullest that another officer or deputy mayor could give, but you are here as the representatives of the mayor's team. And unfortunately, Jules Pipe couldn't be here, but I would hope that the mayor's team would be able to work together. And when you're all in the room together, somebody would be able to answer. Assembly Member Russell is going to ask, I think, a couple of questions on the last item on Notting Hill Carnival, MD 3267.
Yes, and I'll preface this with that I wasn't aware this item was coming to this meeting, but broadly the reason I asked to us to have a look at this was just to understand the any engagement with the Notting Hill Carnival Limited team, so the kind of community team that were delivering this sort of really hefty amount of stewarding for Carnival, and this decision was authorising an extra almost 300,000 of expenditure, and I just wondered what the what the kind of governance engagement with the Notting Hill community team that were delivering it would have been.
Yeah. So, thank you, Assembly Member. There is a governance structure in place for Carnival, as you would expect. It has the LOVSOG group. My memory fails me on precisely what that stands for, but the standard licensing, etc. group that many large events would have. And above that, it has a strategic partners group, which oversees Carnival and looks in a longer multi-year sense. And so, the need for extra stewarding and, discussion about how best to use that, etc., would come through those forums. And then, clearly, it's the Carnival Trust who are the organisers and are then responsible for that stewarding, but they're not directly providing it themselves. It's the stewarding companies they use that would be doing that.
And do you, just to understand for future years, do you have kind of lessons learned? Given the extent of the contribution, do you have a kind of lessons learned follow-up feedback afterwards?
Yeah, so, the event does run a debrief process, yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. That brings to a close our discussion today on mandates and mayoral decisions. Can I thank Io, Richard and David for joining us here in the chamber. And you can take your leave or stay and watch. It will be thrilling, I'm sure. But thank you so much for your time today. And I think Justine is with us. And so if we can do perhaps a quick turnover, and Justine will be here in a minute. Be back here. Is she in? Okay, sorry. Can we? I know this is pedantic. Can we be back at 3:07? to agree any output arising from the discussion.
Agreed.
Many thanks. With that, I'd like to move on to our second item of main business and welcome Justine Simmons, OBE, into the Chamber, the Deputy Mayor for Culture and the Creative Industries. Justine, we're going to have a kind of brief and open Q&A with you today for hopefully around 40 to 45 minutes. Just like to ask you as an opener if you would like to kind of explain your main roles and responsibilities and duties in the role and anything that may stand out that you'd like to mention in an opening statement. Sorry, just press the little man with the speaker.
Brilliant. Just to say Simons, Justine Simons. Don't worry, lots of people say it. And just to say also, I'm just on the other side of a cold, so please bear with me. It's my first day out of bed. All right, so my job is the Deputy Mayor for Culture and the Creative Industries. And I guess in one sentence, I am aiming to keep London at the top of its game as a world-class creative capital. What does that mean in practice? It means the creative economy is thriving, everyone's got access as much as they can to culture in London, and we're doing our best to stay at the top of our game.
Thank you. Assembly Member Russell?
Just getting started on writing some notes. So I would be interested to understand what you think the key lessons that you've learnt through your experience in the role since you started in 2016. So, you know, what are the key things to help you do those things you were just telling Emma in terms of making sure London is thriving as a sort of cultural centre?
Yeah. What are my key lessons? I think thinking about the GLA, for me, I use the word acupuncture, right? Because the GLA is a strategic body, as we know. We don't have tons of money. We're not a grant-giving body in the same way as the Arts Council is, for example. So for me, the essay question is, how can we kind of convene and pull people together, use the policy levers we have, use the funding we have to address whatever is the challenge or the opportunity at that strategic level. And also not to duplicate with what everyone else is doing. We can't do anything on our own. Everything is in partnership. Everything we do is in partnership. So it's working and unlocking those bigger partnerships, thinking about where we can deploy the convening power in the most impactful way, where we can use our limited budgets to unlock real change. I think that's it really, and that's why I describe it as acupuncture as a metaphor. It's kind of where's that sweet spot where we can bring all of those things to bear to make a big difference in London. And I can give you examples if you want to.
Yes, no, that was exactly what I was about to ask you for. So have you got some examples of, the sort of partnership, the convening power, the, other bits?
I mean, I think one of the most interesting examples, is one that is not so well known. It's kind of under the bonnet, and that's the work we've been doing with the planning system. So when I first started at the GLA, there's a paragraph in the London Plan on culture, and then there was a page, and now there's an entire chapter on it. And so what I've been keen to do, using, Sadiq is obviously a great champion of culture, is look at how we can hardwire culture into all aspects of the GLA's work. And planning, I think, is a great example where we've got now this whole chapter on planning. What does that mean in practice? I think planning is a kind of secret superpower for culture, because say we're looking, for example, at the challenge of affordable studios for artists. Mm-hmm. Looking at that challenge, we know that it is a challenge for London, as it is in many world cities. Back to my point about where we can convene and use our power. We've now got artist studios protected in the planning system for the first time. And we've got a series of other policy initiatives around that support it. So one, for example, is our new creative enterprise zones. So there's now 12 zones all around the city, and they are designed to enable artists to put down roots in communities. So we can break this cycle of artists moving into areas where they get cheap space and then getting booted out. So it's about hardwiring it in. And we're on track now to deliver by 2026 about 70,000 square metres of affordable studio space. And that's using all the 12 zones together, and that's something that is accredited through the planning system. So that's a brand new idea that we've experimented with here, and it's worked. The other part of the jigsaw using the planning system is we've written the first cultural infrastructure plan. Why have we written that? Most cities, when they look at what infrastructure they need, they tend to plan for things like transport or housing or hospital beds or school places, right? Never really planned for cultural infrastructure. So that's what we've done. We've set out to 2030 what we think we need in order for London to have the creative and cultural infrastructure it needs to remain at that world-class level. And how do we know we're doing it? We've set up a cultural infrastructure map. So that sits on the GLA website, and it's an open source map. So it means for the first time we've got a really granular understanding of where everything is in the city. I mean, we tend to know where the big theatres are. We tend not to know where the smaller, more kind of intangible, grassroots type venues are. So that's all been mapped. And so, for example, if you're a local authority, you can look at that online and you know what is in an area that you're looking to develop or looking to kind of give a package of land to a developer. So that's the data piece. Then you've got the zoning piece. Then there's two other elements. One is we've tried a new initiative called a Creative Land Trust, which was based on an idea from San Francisco. The idea in San Francisco is called the CAST, Community Action Stabilization Trust. And that was an initiative of the former mayor of San Francisco, Mayor Breed. And they, in San Francisco, again, were dealing with similar challenges to us in London. Affordability. You've got Silicon Valley over there really inflating prices and people having to move out. So that is a social investment trust. So it invests in property, holds it in trusts, remains in trust in perpetuity at an affordable rate. And we've now got that in London. It's called the Creative Land Trust. It's now bought 2 properties. We've got a couple more in the pipeline. The Mayor, Bloomberg Philanthropies from the Arts Council invested in that as the startup. And now the City of Sydney have also copied it. So it's an idea that we're kind of handing around the world as a baton and iterating and improving it each time. So you've got a social investment vehicle, zoning in the plan, the infrastructure plan till 2030, underpinned by the data that we're capturing. And then the final bit of the jigsaw, because a lot of this is long-term, is what happens when someone's in immediate crisis. Someone picks up the phone and says, my lease has run out, what can I do? What are my negotiating rights? How can I get business rate reduction? How can I get help with a contract? So that we deal with a part of the team called the Culture and Community Spaces at Risk. In shorthand, I call it the bat phone. And that is the frontline service, really, where organisations, small organisations largely at risk, can call up that phone line, register on the website and get help. Because what we find is that, most organisations at risk are dealing with quite similar things. So we've got, for example, toolkits and help on licensing, on how to negotiate a lease, what's a fair rate, all of this stuff now we're capturing so that people aren't reinventing the wheel each time. And that is something we started before the pandemic, but 2020 and the pandemic, it just really escalated. And we've dealt with over 1,500 cases since the pandemic. So that would be a kind of example of using the kind of convening, the policy, the acupuncture, at how we're managing to really support a lot of organisations in quite a tactical way, using the powers of the GLA.
That's really interesting that you mentioned the pandemic, and I suppose that's the same as the kind of support that small businesses creative businesses or creative activities are going to be similar to small businesses and needing that kind of help. And one of my follow-up questions are going to be, were there any lessons that came out of the pandemic? So I suppose, was there anything else that came out of the pandemic beyond that bit that you've just been describing?
Yeah, lots of lessons. I think the biggest one is just the fragility of life as an artist, as a freelancer. I think we know that, but that was something that really was kind of escalated really in the pandemic. And I mean, you'll remember that freelancers were not included in the government support schemes at the beginning. We did quite a lot of lobbying to get them included. There was a study out by DAX a few weeks ago, I think the average salary of an artist is something like £10,000, you know. It's going down and down. So, you know, the perception might be that, you know, artists are well paid and they're quite rich, and that's true for kind of a handful of people, but the majority of creatives are, you know, below the living wage. So I think there is, you know, some real issues around paying conditions, you know, around rights for freelancers, for sure. And just on the lessons, if you're interested,
yes.
One of the things that I convened in the pandemic was a series of webinars, Zoom calls with my colleagues in other world cities, because of course we were all new to this and we were all dealing with quite similar situations. And you know, you'll remember that people were at different stages at different times, weren't they? You know, the Italians and the Chinese were hit first. You know, it kind of moved around the world, didn't it? And then it came back again. And so we had quite a regular dialogue during that period where we were just sharing intelligence, sharing what had worked, sharing what hadn't worked. And actually we captured that. And King's College have then taken it and they've produced a report on it. And I think from the top of my mind, I think there were 190 different new policies that we generated as a group of world cities in the pandemic on culture, and that exists now as a research document and a report, which is great, you know, because it won't be the only pandemic. You know, now we've got that learning captured for cities.
And do those policies, do some of those policies that were developed during that period endure and continue?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people who, you know, advanced work in the public realm, for example. You know, lots of the streeteries. You know, lots of it actually. In a positive way, there was quite a few policies that people had wanted to get moving, and the pandemic gave them a kind of urgency to get it moving because they were a suite of policies that helped with social distancing, etc. Yeah.
And sorry, I've just got one question. I wanted to go back to the Creative Land Trust and the studio buildings.
Yeah.
So you said there was it 70,000 square metres of? No, that was.
So the creative enterprise zones.
That's
yeah.
Okay.
So that's the kind of rezoning area.
Okay, but the Creative Land Trust, how many studio spaces are that? How many artists are supported by that?
I think I've got that somewhere. I think.
And if you don't have it to hand, I'm sure come back to us afterwards. I was just curious.
I think it's something. I think it's 183 artists who we've supported so far.
And those
I
artists.
was just thinking, if you get a moment to check it later or it comes in, you can let us know. But as Caroline says, you can send it.
But just to be clear how that works, those 183 artists, are they able to use that space forever? Or
they're in perpetuity, the studios are, and it works with the studio providers. So you might be familiar with people like Space Studios, or it's quite a unique thing in the UK where we have studio providers who take on buildings and then sublet them to artists. So the key thing there is ownership of the building. So the buildings are then owned in trust. So whoever the artist is, it will still be an artist, right? So the usage is affordable rates for artists in perpetuity. Yeah. Lots of interest in it internationally.
I'm sure, and I'm sure there's lots of interest in getting more buildings, but I'll hand back to the Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Baker.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to pick up on that last discussion before I ask a more general question, because I was going to ask about the risk to smaller grassroots venues that is coming about through nothing to do with culture. It's economic, it's development, and stuff like that. And obviously you've talked about like the bat phone, but with the scale of the problems that some venues are facing, how much are you able to help, and what else really needs to be done, do you think? And this is obviously, some of this would be outside your scope, to make sure that we're not losing those grassroots venues. I mean, I would ask you to comment on how much we need them. I suppose it's a given, but, you know, how much we need them in terms of the wider ecosystem for culture and creative industries in London.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll take that first. I mean, if you think of culture and creative economy as an ecosystem in London, it generates 51 billion a year for the London economy. 1 in every 5 jobs is a creative one. It's 12%, right, of the London economy. And we talk about that quite a lot. It's the reason 4 out of 5 tourists come. All of that is a fantastic success story. What is underpinning that success story? It's artists, it's grassroots venues. You know, if you want to kind of make a career as a musician, you're starting in a grassroots venue. If you're an artist, you need a space to work, you know. So these are kind of spaces that are under the radar. And they don't tend to have the kind of protections, really, that other grander spaces have, like theatres, like museums. But they're absolutely vital to this kind of top-line world-class success story that we have, and we need to protect in London. So they couldn't be more vital. In terms of what we can do to help, I mean, as I say, I think we're kind of working through the levers the GLA has got in. You know, we're pushing the envelope, basically. We're doing more than has ever been done. And we're doing, you know, more than has been done in many cities around the world. As I say, lots of people are copying what we're doing. Actually, New York have copied the bat phone. The mayor of New York copied the culture at risk idea as their pandemic response. So, yeah, I think I'd just say we're doing our absolute best, you know. But we've made great strides, you know. Protecting all of these things in the planning system it's a really big deal, you know. Now, if you're a big development coming through, we've got this like-for-like no net loss policy. So, you know, no longer can we just lose these things with no trace. If we've got a big development like Crossrail, no longer do we kind of find out things halfway through the build, right? We know them in advance because we're mapping it and it's all there in a live way, you know. So all of these things, I think, are really shifting the dial. And, you know, hopefully in 10 years' time, things will look a lot different.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And, yeah, my wider question was sort of going to be looking back and looking forward. And obviously we've talked about the pandemic quite a bit, but in the sector, are there any other sort of wider trends? I mean, some of them probably sort of that's accelerated by the pandemic, but the wider trends that have been seen in the sector over your period in office, and then over the next sort of few years in the rest of this mayoral term, what are you expecting are going to be the biggest challenges in the sector? Does that make sense? Yeah. It's a big question.
Maybe shall I just start with the challenges? I think. I mean, I think. Despite all the brilliant success, I think it has never been a more difficult time for culture, honestly. I think there's 3 main areas I'd kind of break that down into. The first is the collapse of funding. There was a report out this year by the Campaign for the Arts, which showed that UK spends the lowest in Europe on the arts. And then on top of that, you have council spending reducing. So since 2010, council funding for the arts has reduced by 50%. And council spending is, you know, a kind of quiet but really important big part of the funding ecosystem for the arts in London and in the UK. So that's, you know, major as councils have come under more and more pressure with less and less budgets. You know, culture isn't a statutory thing, and so it has been hit disproportionately hard, I would say, by that trend. EU funding, you talked about that a bit earlier. We no longer have access to EU funding for the arts. You know, that is a massive drop in available resources for arts and culture. And then we've seen government policy move money out of London. So we saw, under the previous government, a movement of Arts Council money, 56 million cuts to London. Plus there was a redistribution of 16 million to national portfolio organisations outside of London, and then a further 8 million for people who wanted to move as well. So you've got this whole kind of perfect storm combination of funding collapse, and so it's really, really tough. I can't kind of like express that clearly enough. It's a really tough environment. I think the other factors are COVID. I tend to talk about the creative sector having long COVID, because it's a sector that was hit really hard, really quickly, and then it's taking a long time to rebuild. And that is because people just weren't sitting on lots of assets. You know, people ground down their valuable reserves. They picked up a lot of debt. They've still got a lot of debt. So that, I think, has got a kind of long tail, COVID still. And then Brexit would be the other major challenge/trend. EU was our biggest market for the creative economy. So now we're seeing, you know, a lot of trade barriers there. You know, movement of artists is much more difficult. There was a report out that showed that British musicians touring in European festivals since Brexit had fallen by 45%. And then the skill shortages. Creative employers, 42% of creative employers say they're struggling to fill. They're struggling with skill shortages. So myriad big challenges. Then you kind of layer that on top of the kind of demographics. If you think about London, we all know 27% of Londoners living in poverty. Some of the greatest disparities in engagement in arts and culture, we can see those in London. And all of this stuff amplifies that. It doesn't make it better, makes it worse. So yeah, many, many challenges. However, you know, we've got an ambitious programme here. You know, we've got East Bank, you know, on its way as the biggest cultural education district opening in the Olympic Park. We've got a new Museum of London. The work we've been doing with the creative economy is making a real difference, boosting the economy there. London Borough of Culture is going from strength to strength. I talked to Caroline about all the planning work we've been doing and the real impact that's making on the ground. So, yeah, we're doing our best. We're remaining kind of ambitious and optimistic, but I can't pretend the circumstances aren't really, really challenging.
Yeah, no, fully understood, fully understood. I wonder whether I could ask whether what wider support you'd like to see from other stakeholders, government, councils, businesses, to start turning that round. And within that, I wonder, you mentioned London having the greatest disparity of who engages in culture. Are there specific interventions that would help bridge that gap? And also, do you feel a change in the water in terms of that? Well, I'm going to say attacking London's cultural base, you know, through a sort of.
Do you mean
faux redistributive, right. You know, so are you seeing
national government and
yeah. Is that changing? Because that was very negative, not only for London's culture, but for, frankly, the rest of the country's culture. So
yeah, definitely. Okay, I'll take those. So bridging the gap. I mean, I think the biggest thing we're doing is the London Borough of Culture. Yeah. You know, that has now reached 12 boroughs. So there's two parts to it. There's the major award that you win, and then we always ask boroughs who are bidding to give us, as part of their application, a kind of exemplary flagship project. And so all of those projects also get kind of scored and graded, and we give out awards for those, and they often form a bit of a pipeline. Mm-hmm. So like when Lewisham, the year before Lewisham won the main award, they had got a pipeline project. We call them Cultural Impact Awards, which was a project celebrating older people. And that kind of, it helped them on their journey to get it. So we've got the kind of pipeline piece and also the main award. So it's reached 12 boroughs. The stats, I think, are quite significant. 3 million audiences. We've had 4,500 local people volunteer. So that in itself is really fantastic. People want to engage. It provides that kind of space for people to kind of get involved in their local community. Over 400 schools have been involved. And 2,300 artistic partners. So I think, again, back to this point to Caroline of using our resources to kind of make the most impact. That's another good example. I think between them, all of those boroughs have leveraged in another £22 million of funding off the back of the London Borough of Culture. And it's a very deep programme. You know, it reaches a lot of people locally. It's a source of civic pride. It's a celebration of culture. You know, often we've tended to think about culture as being in the centre of London, and culture, of course, is everywhere. It's our DNA. It's in every borough, in every community in London. And so the Borough of Culture is a really good bridge building kind of programme in that sense. I mean, I remember when we did Waltham Forest, the first one, the leader said to me what a kind of change programme it had been really for the council, because she said it's been like nothing else. It brought everyone together from all the different parts of the council. And their volunteers, they call them the Legends of the Forest, because it's Waltham Forest. I know, it's great. And then I saw her just as COVID hit, and she said, you know, thank goodness for the Legends of the Forest, because they were already trained as volunteers and engaged, and they immediately became the COVID response volunteers. So it has lots of ripple effects, I think, around it. So, yeah. And on the national government, yeah, I think things are a lot better. Obviously, there's political alignment in a way that there wasn't before, just to state the obvious. I think we definitely are not seeing that kind of let's just attack London for political gain narrative that we've seen in the past, which I agree with you has been really damaging for London. And for us as well, you know, we want to work collaboratively with the rest of the UK. You know, over half of the UK's creative economy is in London, but it is connected to the rest of the UK. Touring is connected, co-commissioning is connected. It's all part of one ecosystem. So in the real world, it's one connected ecosystem. And we're always keen that we are a kind of productive and good partner in helping the UK to thrive. I think the other thing, I think we'll see this over time, but it was great to see in the Labour manifesto the link to their culture plan. Yeah. So in their culture plan, they proposed producing a cultural infrastructure plan, which of course we've piloted in London. Lots of ideas around zoning. So lots of the things I've been talking about are getting picked up. So, you know, fingers crossed they work their way through the programme. So that's really good.
Thanks. That sounds hopefully really positive. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. And just want to pick up a couple of bits from there. Obviously, Justine, on the representations to government. Yeah. Particularly, obviously, the Arts Council one. I think that's a particularly interesting one because it's difficult for us here in London, right? We lost a lot of funding. Yeah. But equally, that was investment outside of London where they had been given kind of a short straw, for want of a better phrase, in terms of the funding from the Arts Council, and there was a redressing of that balance. Obviously, as in London, that was harder to take. So, are you actively encouraging this government to divest from that arrangement and to bring that funding back into London?
No, I wouldn't characterise it as divestment. I mean, my approach is
reverse that trend and bring that investment back from outside London? Is that what you're lobbying for?
We're not, no. I think Margaret Hodge has just been announced as the chair of the Arts Council Review, and we will be wanting to work really closely with her to make representations about the value of London. And our approach will be to make sure that the value of London to the wider UK creative ecology is really fully understood. In my view, it's not a zero-sum game. You know, it's not. It's about how we grow the pie as opposed to how we fight over small bits of the pie. So I think it's the reverse, really. It's like, how can we, as London, play this bigger part around, you know, supporting the rest of the UK?
Okay, so you don't want that decision to be reversed. So is the representation that for more funding?
I mean, listen, I'm always up for more funding.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, well, that's what I'd like to know is, are you specifically making that representation? Is there a figure and are you asking for that money? Because, I mean, and you can be the first one to come out of line, Justine, but strangely, we've seen this change from both officers and deputy mayors that where we used to put sums on money we wanted from government, we are not getting sums of money we want from government. But I welcome if you would like to put a price on what we are hoping for.
I mean, it's a bit too early in a way. They've said that there will be a review of the Arts Council, and it was announced just this week, I think, or last week. I think it was this week that Margaret Hodge will chair it, and that will be the moment that we'll make representations. And you know, so it's kind of in train, and we'll make those representations at the appropriate moment.
Okay. Well, it's interesting to know you're not representing that the previous government's decision be reversed at this point. The other point I had to raise with Waltham Forest, you may not know, the leader of the opposition there, one thing that people will continually tell me to this day is why on earth did we spend £30,000 on a bicycle ballet? How do you deal with that criticism? Do you think we should have spent £30,000 on a bicycle ballet? That was the cultural fund, by the way. That's why it's relevant.
Yeah, I think the thing about Waltham Forest is it was a fantastic programme. You know, it reached all corners. Every single school took part in it. I'm not across the actual detail of that budget for that individual programme, but you know, I think the idea is to bring sport and art together and to engage with, you know, communities. And there's a great history, isn't there, of kind of bike riding in Waltham Forest. And it was growing out of that kind of story and bringing people together.
So £30,000 for a bicycle ballet, a good deal?
I think the whole programme delivered really good bang for its buck.
I think if it was a good deal, you'd say so, personally. And I promise you, that's the legacy that's been left with so many people, especially in the north of the borough where I represent. If you talk about the borough culture, the only thing they can remember is £30,000 for a bicycle ballet. Assembly Member Bakari.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I just want to say thank you for coming today and answering our questions. Can you remember the last time you came to a committee meeting to be asked questions on your specific role?
No, can't remember.
Yeah, it's been a while. It was, in fact, the Economy Committee that I chaired back in the old building, and we did a report on Off the Beaten Track on small theatres and museums.
Oh, yeah.
Do you recall that?
Yeah.
Do you remember the recommendations that were made in that?
Not off the top of my head, no.
So a lot of them are actually related to the things that we've just been talking about, the fact that small theatres and museums are really struggling because of the pandemic, and actually warned of all the things that you've just talked about in terms of the collapse of funding. And there were recommendations made in that report. Do you feel like you've met any of those recommendations from the report on specifically those issues?
Obviously, I haven't got it in front of me. Do you want to remind me?
So one of the things that happened throughout the conversations that we had with members of from the panels, we had a round table with small theatres and museums. They all talked about the fact that they were worried about the lack of funding, which you've talked about, the fact that they had little engagement from the Mayor of London and the team and the GLA, and they wanted to be able to access the support from you and the teams here to be able to access funding pots, to be able to work out how to get that funding that they needed. And that was one of the recommendations that came through within the report. Do you think that's something that you can now consider doing proactively, working with those small theatres? Because if I was to do a round table again, what do you think their feedback will be?
So, just so I'm clear, the recommendation was that you wanted funding pots from the GLA.
No, to have better relationships with yourself, with the GLA, to be able to meet others, to be able to talk to other groups as well, and to say, how did you get your money? How did you get your funding? To be able to share good practice. It's a really good recommendation, and I think something that I was hopeful that would have been taken seriously by the Mayor and yourself. And it was a cross-party committee report done with real voices from the small theatres and museums in London who are at risk every day of closing down at the moment, as I'm sure you're aware.
Yeah, well, what I would say is our Culture at Risk office, that's what they do. There's lots of small theatres getting support and advice through that. Since 2020, just to remind you, we've supported over 1,500 small arts organisations, and a lot of those are theatres. So I would say, yes, we are here to help. Yes, we are doing that. Yes, we have toolkits. Yes, we have training. Yes, we convene people together. We're not a funder. So if a recommendation was that people wanted to access funding here...
No. They're pretty good, the team here in the Secretariat. They know what to suggest in their recommendations.
It's just that you mentioned funding pots. So just to be 100% clear, that isn't something that we will provide because it's not our role and we don't have that resource. But in terms of the first part of what you were talking about, advice and help, absolutely. The Culture at Risk office is doing that with bells on.
Okay. Well, I'll be really keen to meet those individuals myself, but it'd be great if you could do the same and meet those specific groups that we met, theatres, museums, who did say they felt that there was that lack of engagement. And if you were to meet them, I'm sure that they would give you the feedback that you need to help them and support them. One of the people that came to the panel was representatives from the Migration Museum. And we recently had a motion, again, cross-party support, asking specifically to meet you. You've responded with a lovely response about how you support the Migration Museum, but the ask was for them to meet you personally. You did not answer that question.
If I can answer the first part, you raised two questions for me. One is, you'd love for some of the people you spoke to in that review to meet me. The door is always open. I'm not aware.
But you're not going to proactively meet them?
If those theatres want to meet me and the team, the door is always open.
Okay.
You know, I'm not aware of a request that I have not responded to in terms of small theatres, but the door is open.
Okay.
Migration Museum, lots of engagement with the Migration Museum. I was there when it was in Lewisham. We launched the Lewisham Borough of Culture there.
So you say you were there, but I've actually asked them today, and I said, have you actually met yourself personally? They've said no.
Well,
they've not actually met you.
I'm very happy to meet them.
So
very happy to meet
could you please now categorically say that you will now in writing as well, because they have asked, we've done a motion, you're
very
going to
happy
meet
to meet them,
and you're going to discuss again, it's about funding and that need for that support.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm very happy to meet them. We have lots of engagement with them. There isn't a pot of money that we have. So if
yes, they are aware of that, and you can see the motion. It's not asking for money. It's about that engagement and that support.
Yeah,
that so many
100%
museums need
they have our support. I only mentioned funding because you mentioned funding. Just to be clear.
Yeah.
What I don't want to do is have a meeting with the expectation
they will not
that
have
there's
that.
some funding that can be unlocked.
It's about sharing that knowledge, sharing that expertise, and also you bang the drum for these amazing museums and theatres. That's what they need. They need to know that you're there for them in the most open and public way, to bang their drum and to say that you're there for them, to support them. So I'm really pleased that you will be personally meeting them. That was a very simple ask. It was a shame that you didn't put that in writing in your response to the motion, but I'm glad that you've now made that commitment. And I do want to also ask about this particular term in office. What do you need to achieve for your work to be considered a success by the Mayor and this committee?
I think for the rest of the term, what are we looking forward to? East Bank, I think, will be a big part of our delivery plan. It will be the biggest culture and education district for 150 years in London. We'll see new Sadler's Wells East opening in February next year. The new V&A will open next year as well. London College of Fashion and UCL both open. So that they've brought over 10,000 students now to the Olympic Park, and then of course the BBC moving there too. So all in all, we'll see, I think, 1.5 million visitors a year to East Bank. That's our projection, and it will deliver 2,500 jobs. And a 1.5 billion to the economy, and it's something I'm really proud of. A lot of Olympic Games, struggle with their legacies. Money's run out often by the time the legacy gets there. So I'm really proud that, Sadiq has prioritised the culture and education legacy, and we've invested so heavily in this fantastic resource. It's really going to be an anchor in the Olympic Park. It'll be something for people to go to every day of the week. It will change the dynamic, I think, from the kind of in and out of sport or the one-off concerts. When everything's open in East Bank, there'll be an everyday offer in the park, which I think will really change the game. Be fantastic. Then we've got 2 London Boroughs of Culture coming up. We've got a new London Museum coming up. And more work on the creative enterprise zones. So there's lots.
Brilliant. Well, you mentioned sports and the legacy of the Olympic Games. Another motion that we passed unanimously here was about volleyball. We haven't had a response on that. have you got anything to say on this particular motion on us having a home for volleyball in the United Kingdom, in London?
I don't, because I don't cover sport.
Okay, it'll be good to have some responses to our motions. We work collaboratively and we work cross-party, and I think there are specific groups, like I've been mentioning, who'd want to have some answers. So if you can chase that answer, that would be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I've got 3 Assembly members left to speak, so if you all can keep it under 5 minutes, we should be fairly good for time. Justine, I just felt fairly, as a guest, I should give you the opportunity. Have you been invited to any committee members since your committee meeting, since your last invite?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. I've got Assembly Member Georgiou.
Yeah. When you invite me, I come, but,
I was giving you an opportunity.
Yeah. I don't think so. If there is, I'm not aware of it.
Thank you, Justine. Because I'm time conscious, I'll keep my questions brief, and if I do cut you off, it's not intended to be rude. I just want to make sure we get through as much as possible. Amy LeMay is no longer the Knights Are. Have you taken up any part of that work?
Broadly, yeah. We've got a kind of interim arrangement, really, where myself and the Deputy Mayor for Business, Howard Dauber, are doing a bit of the work with the team as well. And then the next iteration of the work is the Nightlife Task Force, which we will announce next year.
Okay, so therefore, do you still think we need the Knights Are role, given that you've managed to accommodate without one?
There's a lot of work to be done, and I think what we're going to do is look at what the task force comes up with, and their job is really to kind of make some recommendations, come up with an action plan, and work with us really to think about what next, really, how we kind of manage this important portfolio moving forward. So I would say we're in a kind of interim, really, right now.
Great, thank you. I'm now going to move on to some questions about your expenses and gifts. On gifts, you were lucky enough to be gifted tickets to see Taylor Swift, it's very topical at the moment, during the summer. Do you know who donated those tickets to you?
I do.
Could you tell us?
Yes. It was Universal Music.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
By the way, that's on the website, I think.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm excited that you're here, so I'm keen to ask these questions. Did you receive an extra ticket to take someone with you?
I did. I got a pair of tickets.
Okay. And who went with you to the concert, if you're at liberty to say?
I took my partner.
Okay. Thank you very much. And were you also offered tickets to see Taylor Swift on the 15th of August?
No.
No?
Don't think so.
So you weren't offered, or you didn't go?
I was offered a set of tickets and asked when I could go according to the dates, and I picked the 20th.
Right, okay. So there weren't 2 sets of tickets, it was just for the one day. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I think I was away then.
I appreciate it. It was a very busy schedule. So over the course of your time as Deputy Mayor, you've attended the Olivier Awards, the BAFTA Awards, Vogue, Chanel events, Elle Awards, parties and dinners. How does you attending these events help Londoners?
I would say that, my job is Deputy Mayor for Culture and the Creative Industries. And in practice, that means showing up at events across culture and the creative industries. And that means banging the drum. It means turning up at, theatre shows, turning up at events, accepting speaking engagements. My portfolio is unique in the sense that a lot of the output of my stakeholders happens in the evening. And so that's what my schedule really reflects that. So I do attend events that are, kind of delivered by my stakeholders.
No, I appreciate that, but where I'm trying to draw the line is where do we draw the line between attending an event for work purposes and when does it become a work perk? And I think by virtue of the fact of what you are the Deputy Mayor for, there are a lot of work perks. So I'm just trying to draw the line between, in your mind, what is the difference between the two?
Yeah, in my mind there is not a difference. All of those events I'm attending for work purposes. So one day when I'm not the Deputy Mayor, I won't be invited and I won't go.
Okay, so I guess my final question then, to draw a line under this, is when you did attend the Olivier Awards, how does it work? What do you do to bang the drum for London with all these celebrities?
I mean, showing up, being there, for all of those theatres that Tina's mentioned, being in the room and celebrating the incredible success of British theatre, so much of which happens in London. There's also networking events beforehand, networking events in the intervals and after. So it's a really important stakeholder engagement moment, as well as a moment to really bang the drum and be present as the representative of London government for this incredible and important industry in our capital. Very important industry. I'm just trying to... How do you measure how successful these networking events with these people? I mean, how do you say, okay, I've swanned around at old Vogue, wherever, where do we say, right, this is the metric to say that Justine's been there, it's been a real success, and this is what it's brought to London? How do we measure that? Yeah, in a spreadsheet. Okay. No, we don't. I'm kidding. Oh well, no. I love a good spreadsheet, and I'm disappointed you don't have one. So is the answer you can't? You can't. No, I'll tell you what happens. Yeah. Of course, there is not a spreadsheet. It's a live human event where you're meeting people, right? So there's myriad connections. What I would generally do at those events, I generally do a readout for the team. So there'll generally be sparking connections. People will want help, support. They'll want advice. Can you help me with this? Do you know about that? Can we do this? And so I'll usually do a quick readout of actions and I'll distribute them with the team and then we pick them up. And actually they do go on a spreadsheet. It's called the task tracker. So we're quite, systematic actually about how we use the events. And when members of the team go to events, they do the same too. Right, but okay, I'll leave final point. If we could, is any chance getting that task tracker? No. No, okay. I thought no, I'd probably make it redundant going to all these posh events, but thank you, Chair. I think there's an important point there, Justin, especially when you look at the media and what's happened in the summer. There's a lack of trust around politicians of any shade going to events and perhaps taking them as work perks. And so although you joke about the spreadsheet, that actually is really important. And I personally would like to see it, not necessarily something that's a live document that is confidential, but how an example template of how you capture that work, because the trust has been lost, and that's not a partisan political point. It's of all politicians attending events. It's of everybody. There is a lack of trust, and so actually showing what those events for, I think, is very important. And so it would be good to see that. Okay, if we could calm down, Assembly Member Baker, if you could calm down, and Assembly Member Mahfouz.
I'm fine. I'm happy to not ask the question, but thank you. Yeah,
Assembly Member McCartney. Okay, brilliant. You brought us back on the schedule, but if I could just ask one thing then, because we've got the time, Justine. Obviously, we've run through a few motions. I was ashamed. I thought she might still be here, but Assembly Member Clark and Assembly Member Lord Bailey recently put a motion forward to the Assembly that was passed on a London Arts Trail. Is that something that's come across your desk yet, or that you've seen? No, but happy to look at it. Okay, this would be the idea of kind of creating a map which links up an arts trail around London to get people, I think as you said earlier, not just in the immediate kind of big areas in central, but out into the outer bits of London. Public art trail or gallery trail or... Just no, it would be a number of things, I think. So there would actually be, it was a commission as well to have some additional things. But I mean, there's some great things already happening. It's like London Gallery Weekend, for example. That's a trail of art galleries all around the capital, small galleries where they kind of join together, promote themselves, bring more public in. You can trail around the city. Lots of public art trails exist as well. But yeah, super happy to have a look at it. Do have a look, and we look forward to your response. And thank you for coming to our Q&A. And I'll let you leave. But obviously, as always, the invite's open to stay. But I won't judge you if you don't. Okay, for everyone else, we're going to take a break until 4, and if we could be back in here for 4 to finish on our final item. Thanks. Can I welcome everyone back into the chamber? And I've got my second rap on the knuckles because I didn't do the important bit again. So can I ask the committee to note the report as in relation to our last discussion with the Deputy Mayor for Culture and Creative Industries? Can I ask the committee to note the report as background, to put in questions to the invited guests and note the subsequent discussion? Thank you. And can I ask members to delegate authority to the Chair in consultation with the Deputy Chair and Party Group lead members to agree any output arising from discussion? Thank you. Can I also, before we get into what, unfortunately, David and Nicole I think may prove another fiery debate at times, can I just remind everyone that you will hear questions that you don't think are appropriate or don't think you are agreeable, or comment that you don't think is agreeable. But the important things of these committees is this is the debate, and we do move to cross-party outputs. And so if you don't hear something you're happy with, then you cannot be happy with it, but it's best to hold back your tongue if you can, please. So with that, okay, move into a review of people's question time. I'd like to welcome, as just said, David Holly, the Head of Events for London, and also Nicole Valentinuzzi, Assistant Director of External Relations. I'll move straight, I think, to Assembly Member Mahfouz.
Thank you. Nice to see you both. I'm going to start off with one of the questions that we sort of raised in the letter that came out of previously, and it was about the timescale for notifying residents who were ticket holders as to where the exact location was. What was that timescale that we used for the last PQT?
So anybody who applied for a ticket was notified that they had been successful on 3 days before the event. So for example, the PQT that has just taken place took place on Thursday, and they were notified on Monday that they had been successful.
So that was that they were successful with getting a ticket?
That they were successful and the location.
Location at the same time, okay. So they didn't know that it was successful at the time they applied?
Correct. Yes, that is correct.
Right. So if I'd applied as a ordinary resident, and when do we close the date for when people could apply?
Good question. I'd have to check that specific date, but I believe it was maybe 3 or 4 days before that Monday, so the week before.
Right. So, but at the time that you've applied, you don't know whether you've even got a ticket?
That's correct.
But there is a limit in terms of how many tickets that we issue out, right? So,
well, we actually oversubscribed for PQT because of quite a big dropout. But there's still a limit. There is, yes, there is a limit to the capacity.
And generally, it's first come, first served.
That's correct.
Unless there were some issues with the person who's applied.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, would that not be better reviewed in terms of sort of making sure that people know, well, at least know immediately that they've got a ticket? Is it a bit like a concert that you would know actually before it's sold out? Yeah, if it's first come, first served.
It's definitely something that we can take away and review and see if that would be a better option. Absolutely.
How many tickets did we? I think it was a sellout, was it, for last Thursday evening?
No, it wasn't a sellout. I think we registered around 430 tickets for the event.
And how many did we have? Turn up on the evening?
I haven't got the final figures for the event last week, but I can share that with the committee after this.
Sure. Are there any plans at the moment to survey the people who didn't come as to why they didn't come?
There aren't any plans at the moment, just because it's actually a regular occurrence for people not to attend. As I say, we have such a big dropout that it's not necessarily unusual that we had a high number of people not attend.
But I mean, so we're in the hall. I appreciate there are very legitimate reasons why people wouldn't have come in terms of it was a horrible wet evening. It was 2 weeks before Christmas, and so ultimately those might have played a significant part in people not turning up. But I think we are looking to feed into what this looks like going forward for the next 3.5 years. So understanding the rationale as to why people haven't turned up when they've gone to the trouble of applying for a ticket is would be incredibly useful information.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure we can find a way of communicating with those people who registered and find out if there was a specific reason for why they didn't show.
I'm going to move to locations. At the moment, we're proposing that we move to 5 locations going forward, so 1 central and 1 in each quadrant of London. Have we identified what those sites are yet?
No, there is still work being undertaken to identify those sites.
And presumably, once we've gone sort of once around, we would go back to those locations.
Exactly, yeah. The rationale behind choosing 5 venues is that best practice can be built upon in regards to those venues. So having a good understanding of the security plans, the venue, the layout, etc. So absolutely, the ambition is that we would return to those venues. Yes.
Nicole?
And the venues are being chosen according to a fairly strict security set of requirements that came out of not just the review, but actually lessons from previous PQTs. Things like stage height, the position of lights, different exits, green rooms, proximity to stations, all that kind of thing.
So transport access is one of those
Yes.
features, yeah?
Yeah.
And clearly security features really highly in that selection criteria.
Yes.
So what you started off with there, David, was to say that we notified residents that they only 3 or 4 days beforehand as to what the location was. As we'll be going back to the same venues, how does that work?
So we have a long list of venues at this point. We are hoping that there are more than 5 venues that we will be able to use throughout the course of the term. But we will have to, again, at the end of this term, review whether this has worked, whether those venues have worked, and what we do going forward at that point.
Because I think just going back to the location again, we stated what the borough was when people were applying, but they didn't know which town it was within that borough.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, they didn't know the actual the venue. They knew the borough, but they didn't know the actual venue.
Yeah.
But I mean, some boroughs are obviously absolutely immense in terms of geographical coverage. So, and then I'm just going to move on to the question of chairing. So at the moment, we had obviously has been for 24 years. It's been chaired by a member of the Assembly, and we're very capably so at the last Assembly meeting. What's the idea behind having an independent chair?
So the review essentially identified that it would be good to have a professional chair that has a experience in crowd management, and that is the underlying driver for that. But we're obviously happy to hear. We are aware through the consultation that we've done so far with Assembly members that this is an area of concern. So we are happy to hear formally from the committee on that.
I mean, I think going back to Assembly Member Best's point earlier in the previous discussion, there's an element of sort of trust, and obviously when you've got somebody who's chairing the meeting who is local and understands the local community because they're that local representative, that there's an opportunity there to build a rapport with the audience. But if we were to go down the route of an independent chair, have we got an idea of what that might cost, how we would recruit?
So we would be, hold on, sorry, let me remind myself of the criteria that we're looking for an independent chair. So we would look to select someone on the basis of experience, neutrality, and representation, though the final choice would be based on fees and availability. So we're not going to be trying to get someone who is a household name, but somebody who has experience in broadcast or in presenter kind of, presenter experience.
Yeah, so that would definitely be in terms of sort of neutrality, and but by the sounds of it, it might be somebody who is either a radio or a TV presenter, a journalist,
possibly
potentially background where they've sort of known for their neutrality and ability to challenge.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, definitely.
So how would that balance with the ability to manage a crowd?
So it's a hard job to fulfil, and I think that's why it has come up in the review, because not everybody has the skills necessary to be able to chair a debate and also respond to a room full of people and manage behaviour. And so it is a hard job to fill. So I think when we are searching for chairs to fulfil this role, as well as obviously having the skill set that Nicole has spoken about, they will also need to be able to do those elements of the role. So they need to be able to manage a public debate amongst yourselves and the mayor fairly, but they also need to be able to have experience of managing an event of this nature and managing the room and being able to deal efficiently with any unruly behaviour, and just making sure that the event continues to run smoothly and that Londoners can have the opportunity to ask questions to yourselves and to the mayor without it being disrupted.
And just to finish off, and just before I do that, I think actually the event was very well managed, and obviously we didn't have some of the issues that we'd had at previous ones from a security point of view, and clearly that was incredibly well managed. So huge well done to all of the team there. But just coming back to the sort of level of oversubscription for tickets, is that something that will be part of that review that you have going forward, given the drop-off rate that we had?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So
we always look at the rates across all the events. How many people are coming? How many are dropping out? The percentage dropout, as David says, is higher for PQT than some of our other events, but it is an evening event, and that brings different challenges.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. I mean, just as an initial anecdotal observation, it was quite clear that the room last week was half full, and I've only known PQTs to be full or close to full. So it would seem quite obvious that the percentage is going to be much higher on an initial observation. And so I think that Assemblymember Mafusa's suggestion of reaching out as to why people didn't come would be...
Absolutely.
We don't have all the figures for online attendance, but that was higher than our other events so far.
Yeah, and also, just I don't want to get waylaid in this, but there's a lot of people that couldn't actually get online and were rejected from that system, but maybe I'll pick that up later. But okay. Assemblymember Russell.
Thank you. So I've got comments on various points. But just picking up on the venue to start with, and I think and this is something that has been articulated in the group leads discussions, but we want to be reaching out to Londoners. We want Londoners to feel welcome at PQT. And obviously, it's an event where there is security and all of the stuff that we have in this building of, kind of checking people coming through security systems and things. And people would expect that at an event with the Mayor of London. But I am concerned about these. I was actually at a full council meeting, so I wasn't at PQT, but I'm concerned about the reports that the hall wasn't full, because likewise my experience of PQT is always that it is full, that people actually want to come and they have a chance to ask questions of the Mayor. So I think that's something that we need to really seriously look at before the next meeting. I do think that the not being told the venue is just it's just extraordinary. People make their plans according to the travel arrangements. So a borough, it might be really easy for you to get to one end of the borough using the overground, but to get to the other end of the borough, it might involve the overground plus 2 or 3 buses, and it might be really difficult. And so you do need, and also for someone living actually on the other side of London, it might be quite easy to get to one particular outer London borough because there happens to be a direct overground link that takes you almost to the door of the venue. So you might think, oh yeah, no, we could go to that. We'll sign up and commit. So I think the giving people the information about where they're going and at least where the nearest public transport is, if you feel you can't actually give the venue, but once you've given the nearest public transport, you probably have given the venue. But I do think the way that people attend events is by knowing where they're going, and they make plans according to how convenient or inconvenient it's going to be. So I do think that needs to be very seriously reviewed. I don't have a problem with limiting having a limited number of venues, so long as one's central and at least 4 are in outer London, and so long as there's real thought put into the travel arrangements, because actually, you know, it might be that there's one place, I don't know, in southeast London or whatever, which actually is easy to get to for an awful lot of people using, say, the Overground, whereas there might be another 2 or 3 venues that feel a bit closer together if you just look at a map, but actually in terms of public transport, using those venues is going to service the most Londoners to be able to attend. So I think it's really important that we think about the public transport, not just where these places are on a map, because that will really affect how many Londoners feel able to come along.
Caroline, can I just respond to you? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Just to provide you with reassurance, the work that my team are doing to look at venues includes venues that are near transport hubs, because we also have identified that we need to make it as easy as possible for Londoners to get to those venues. So that is work that's already being continued, being taken place, looking at those venues and the transport hubs, so that we are picking venues that are near transport hubs so that access is as easy as possible.
That's great, but are you thinking about the venues the transport hubs in relation to each other, so that you are servicing the maximum number of Londoners? Because the ease, you know, for someone in Islington, for instance, getting down to Croydon is relatively straightforward. It's just it's slow, but it's round on. There's an overground train that takes you there. So it's like it's just making sure that Londoners across London have got at least one of those venues in the cycle of venues that is possible to get to quite easily. In terms of the chairing, we, again, as group leads, we talked about making sure that for the next few meetings they are chaired by Assembly members. I think there are real questions about an independent chair, how they understand the culture of this political setup. It's unique, as you know, we are the only body like this in the UK, and the understanding of how the Assembly works and in relation to the Mayor is not hugely well understood. So I think any independent chair would need to be incredibly well briefed, and one of the things that came up was just that actually for someone who has political neutrality as part of their job, maybe as a radio broadcaster or TV broadcaster, they might actually not want to be associated with something that's actually quite so political. So that's another side of the whole equation. So it may be that using Assembly members to chair proves to be a more enduring way of doing it. So I do hope that that conversation remains live. The other thing is just about the Appendix 2 with the visitor conduct and search procedures and
the admissions
security arrangements and prohibited items. I mean, all of these things are things that obviously you understand that, yeah, it's not a great idea to take, you know, things that might be dangerous into a big event. But I think the way that is framed is really, really important. And I think the values of the GLA, which is about serving Londoners and wanting to engage with Londoners, the tone of communication around that security piece is really important when people are signing up to an event, because you don't want people to think, oh, this is terrifying. You know, they're trying to keep out people with blades and things. You know, is it safe? And actually, it might be the opposite of reassuring. So it's just about the tone of the context that's put around that kind of information.
Well, as you can imagine, that is a legal document that is drafted by legal, and often with the venue as well. The venue will have specific admission policy criteria that we need to make sure that we're
so I suppose it's about making sure that there is something within the tone of the general invitation that is about welcoming Londoners in, and we're looking forward to hearing your questions, and so that it isn't just a kind of very slightly off-putting kind of very big,
legal,
stringent security thing.
It isn't our intention to scare people not to come. We want people to come to the event. But we will take that away and have a look at the tone of the words, and just see if there can be any softening of that while still maintaining what we need to include in that document.
That's great. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Prince.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. Just following up some points that Assembly Member Mahfouz made, which I thought was good, but I don't think we quite got an answer to it. In relation to the venue, if we're going to settle on a fixed number of venues, then the issue of security becomes a bit bizarre, because if someone's really intent on catching us out, they're going to know exactly which venue is going to come up next, because it's quite likely it's going to be a rotation. So that kind of defeats the object of not telling people until 3 days before the event, literally.
I think you're right. If somebody is trying to catch us out, that would be an issue. We have, as I said, a long list of. We have 7 events left in the term. We have a long list of 10 venues that we're looking at right now. Actually, it's a little bit longer. So we are potentially through the consultation process. We can look to widen that out or reduce it. It's still a live conversation, basically. But that is a very clear point.
Again, going a bit deeper on the security point made by the Assembly Member. Okay, I can understand why you may not want to let the location out until 3 days before the event. But I think you made the point, and I think it just needs making clear. You do need to let people know they've got a ticket, though, don't you? You know, if I've applied for a ticket 2 weeks ago and I don't know if I've got a ticket, I'm not going to keep that space clear. You know, I'm not going to wait and hope that at some point, at some unknown point, you're going to let me know that the event's going to be happening. So I really do think that you should at least, okay, you may want a day to check that there's someone you want to be there, I get that. But after a reasonable period, 1 or 2 days, you should be able to say, well, yep, you've got a ticket, you're coming to the party. We ain't going to tell you where it is, but you're coming to the party. And I just feel that's like...
I think that's definitely something that we can look at. This was the first time implementing that policy. So.
On the chair, I thought Assembly Member Russell made a good point, which again I think just needs developing. Because someone's a good broadcaster on television doesn't make them a good chair at a live event.
Absolutely.
You know, and I really do think, not that I attend too many PQTs to be perfectly honest, there's always a clash with something more important. But those that I've been at, I've never had an issue with the chair, whether the chair was myself or anybody else. I think that the chair always tries to be very unbiased in who they call to speak. And because Assembly members do have experience of chairing meetings, most Assembly members would have chaired an Assembly meeting of some description, and also they know the characters. So, you know, they know that they've got to call Hina, so there's a So you've got a Lib Dem, and then you've got to call one of the Labour people. So there's a Labour speaker, and to be honest, somebody from outside just wouldn't know the political makeup and what would be a fair balance. It could be that if there's only 5 questions to be asked, you'd have to ask 2 Conservatives, 2 Labour and 1 other, or some kind of balance because of the size of the committee. Someone from outside just wouldn't know that. And also they wouldn't have the rapport with the members either that we all have. At the end of the day, we have this theatre called meetings, but most of us, I think all of us, actually get on outside of the chamber, and we have a commitment of fairness towards each other. No unknown chair would be able to do that. And if you just got someone because they're a name, I don't think they would have the experience of dealing with public meetings. And even in those meetings I've been to where there has been disruption, on every occasion, I think that the chair of that meeting handled it very, very well. So I really don't see the argument at all for somebody outside the Assembly. And a point I think is a very good point. I mean, as a constituency chair, or constituency member, I've had the privilege and honour, and it is a privilege and honour to chair those meetings, actually. But I do think there should be a way in which London-wide members can also get a chance to chair the meetings. And I just cannot at all see the argument for not having an Assembly member, because we don't get a lot of limelight, we don't get a lot of chance to go in front of people. I don't see any reason why we should not, as Assembly members, with that knowledge of the business, with that knowledge of the political balance, with that knowledge of the individuals, have the chance to chair these meetings.
Thank you. And I think the most important point there is the money, isn't it? As we're all here for doing those for free. And even if the argument is it would be better to have an independent chair, the financial costs of that must be factored into that argument, surely. But just to come back on the point quickly from Assembly Member Prince, which I think is important, if it perhaps seemed flippant, is on the timing of PQT. I know there's no firm way to do this, right, but it's on a Thursday, and it very, very, very often clashes with full council meetings, which affects a large majority. And if there's any way to review that, that would be really helpful, because a large proportion of Assembly members are councillors. And I think this December was particularly bad with the amount of full council meetings in London, which in turn does make attendance of Assembly members look bad. But unfortunately, especially where a number of leaders of groups and things like that, we have to prioritise full council, and we would like to be at, further to what Assembly Member Prince says, we would like to be at PQT.
That's completely fine. It's never been raised with us from officer level or elsewhere, so we'll take that on board. Absolutely.
Thanks. Assembly Member Bakari.
Thank you. On that point of full council, mine's on a Wednesday, so...
I never knew a full council on a Wednesday, sorry.
But I do take your point of that need for mixing it around a bit. I want to talk about format. You've asked for feedback from us going forward. How will that kind of go in terms of how you respond to the feedback from us? Does that mean that there will be changes because of the feedback that we give you about format specifically?
Yes, yeah. We are genuinely looking for a response to the
And do you do the
report.
same with audience members as well about format? Do you ask them, do you like the format?
Right. We do satisfaction. Yeah. People who come, yes.
Yeah, so people who attend do get a post-event survey. And within that, it's about satisfaction of the event, what bits they felt worked well, what bits perhaps they would like to see different. Mm-hmm. So we do undertake that.
My specific kind of concern sometimes is that it's called People's Question Time, and it's not Mayor's Question Time. And I think there might be a perception from audience members thinking this is, primarily the Mayor answering every single question and other Assembly members just coming in off the back. And it would be interesting to see whether there is that kind of proposed change that might be, something that to think about, because as Assembly Member Prince was saying, we don't get a lot of limelight. This is our opportunity to feed back and perhaps a change in terms of perhaps the mayor not answering the questions first, but other assembly members answering questions first could be a way forward to make sure that we all feel as if we've got something to participate and answer and respond to, because we all do have specific areas of interest that I think a lot of us feel like we don't get the opportunity to speak about because the mayor does take a lot of the time. No offence, but he does talk a lot. Thank you.
I take no offence to that statement. But yes, that's again, if that's something that the committee would like to propose as a shift in format, that's something we can look at.
the committee wouldn't. Sorry.
It's not a committee report. It's just me saying, have there been any?
There's been no
responses on particular format, and that was my individual suggestion. It's not a committee suggestion as such.
Okay.
Just to clarify.
There's nothing that's come from the public surveys so far that I'm aware of.
No.
No.
Thank you. I think the natural way I've seen PQT happen is the audience will say Mr. Mayor, and but it's a public expectation, I think. But obviously, as I said earlier, we'll discuss it all in the output. Assembly Member Georgiou.
For what it's worth, seen as, that stirred the pot a little bit from Assembly Member Bakari, I completely agree with her. How do I put this politely about the Mayor? He is given ample opportunity to answer every point, but the problem is, of course, Londoners expect him to answer those questions and we come off the back of it. But it goes on for ages. So the last PQT, I didn't bother answering anything because what was the point? I follow a very long response, and quite frankly, sorry, there's a lot of chuntering going over there. I had a very long response and it just eats up the time. And so, we are, I'm not talking about, do we need our time in the limelight? I don't think that's necessary. The point I'd make is that, we are democratically elected by Londoners at the same time as the mayor. So I think I align myself with what Assemblyman Bakari said. Something to take back. Nicole, you said that you didn't have the figures for online viewing. It was about 100 people.
No, it was much more than that. There's several feeds.
Okay. Well, on the YouTube one, which
there's multiple YouTube.
No, fine. Okay. Well, once we have a collated, do we have a collated figure?
Not yet. And
I'm very happy for you to say that I'm wrong, you must have an overall number, don't you?
Well, because we have a general number that was close to 1,000, possibly over.
Okay.
I just don't have I don't want to give a specific figure.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So the point I'm trying to make is, out of what, nearly or just over 9 million Londoners, I think what we're all trying to say is everyone has a vested interest. In making sure that our voices are heard, and even the mayor has a vested interest in making sure what he's saying cuts across. And so therefore, by virtue of that, we want PQT to be jazzier, more interesting, and people. So I think that should be the overall focus. I've heard a lot about why an allegedly independent chair might be better. What I've not heard is why assembly members, the constituency members, are not good enough.
I don't think it's the view of officers that anyone is not good enough or has not been good enough in that role. It was something that came out in the review. So that's the point that we were...
No, I understand it came out in the review, but what led them to that conclusion, that AMs could not fulfil that role? Because if you're changing something, it means it's not working. So what's not working with AMs?
The review included interviews with some of the Assembly, and it was from those interviews that the basis for putting in place an independent chair was put forward in the document.
So am I led to understand then that off the back of interviews with Assembly members, they then came to the conclusion that Assembly members should not be chairing it?
It was taken in the round, so it was interviews with Assembly members, but it was also looking at the other concerns around the event. So there was a number of people that were interviewed as part of the review. So there was Assembly members, there were officers, there were also security members of staff. So there was an in the round process, so that views from anybody and everybody who participates were considered. And so it was from doing that that the recommendations in the paper were formed, and as you know, one of the recommendations is for there to be an independent chair.
So I don't think the implication was that that any assembly member was not able to do the role. I don't think that's not what I took from the review.
By implication, I think it very much is, because either an assembly member in their interview said they shouldn't be chairing it, an officer of the GLA have said that, or security have said they shouldn't be doing it, because I don't see any other way you come to the conclusion that someone else would be better at doing that job. And I say this as a London-wide member, I'm never going to chair any of these, so I've got no vested interest. So, you know, I'm trying to defend colleagues' rights in the constituencies to be able to continue what they've been doing for years very effectively. And I say this as someone who, you know, I can't say, having watched previous PQTs, I've only done one as an AM, of assembly members where I felt they've been quite tribal in this place. Actually, when they do PQT, have been entirely fair. So I've really failed to understand how this recommendation came about.
The review has been shared with the group leaders, so the information is in there, and the explanation of how the recommendations have been formed is in that document.
Well, no, because what you've told me is who was interviewed, not necessarily what they said. I don't need names of who said this.
The review does state and quote what people have said in those interviews.
Well, okay, well, I'll discuss that with group leads as a separate point. It's a very fair point. Final one from me. Nicole, my favourite lefty that we've discussed before. James O'Brien, has he...
I thought you were talking about me for a second.
No.
Have you discussed me?
Is that an admission?
No, I don't. I was like, when did we talk about me?
Right, has James O'Brien been considered for chairing PQT? And if not, why not?
Not at this point. I think, just put it bluntly, because of the strength of feeling that has been demonstrated by Assembly members in the past.
Okay, thank you. Well, that was an entirely satisfactory answer. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, and I'm glad to hear that even when we've had chuntering when we've mentioned James O'Brien before, maybe it's been heard. So all's well that ends well. Just wanted to do some final tidying up on some bits. So could you let us know, or could you tell us when you'll be able to let us know how many people actually attended?
Yeah, we can get that information.
We can get that information hopefully by the end of this week, but if not, early next week.
Okay, thank you. And from this discussion, I'm still struggling to understand what the issue is with assembly chairs, and I kind of keep coming back to the phrase in my head: if it's not broken, don't fix it. But maybe that's something you want to share with us outside of the, I don't know. But if you could try and let us know, because to form recommendations on the chair, I'd really like to better understand what the problem is we're trying to fix, and I feel like I don't. But
okay, yeah.
Secondly, I'd misunderstood this, I think. So I just want to clarify so there's not going to be 5 venues. There's going to be more than 5 venues. There's just going to be at least one in each quadrant.
Exactly.
Okay. And some concerns on the location. I mean, I feel like the PQT we've just had, one of the big concerns was don't say the name. And then the first thing the GLA did was print the name on the website. And to my mind, I felt we made this whole song and dance about it, but then we actually published it and still told the mayor and assembly members it was safe. And so to me, that didn't feel quite right.
Yeah, I think that it was published by accident inside the admissions policy. It wasn't, the admissions policy hadn't been redacted in time for it to go up, but it was taken down within 24 hours, and the security team assessed that did not present a problem. So that's why we were happy to go ahead with it. If the security team had come back and said, you know, that now makes this untenable, then we would have had to change our plans.
It just all doesn't link in for me, because look, one of the things I always come at, we're in London, we host big derbies for football matches and things like that every weekend, where there's a significant amount of the population that may wish to do harm to other people that are playing the game or performing, and we manage those events and we tell people where they are, but there doesn't seem to be the same approach to this, which is on a much smaller scale. Traditionally, I've found a lot less alcohol involved in PQT events, and it just doesn't seem to measure up still. And I think we made a lot of these representations to you in our letter earlier, and I do hope it's taken on board. I think we can be in a place where we share these venues personally, but the very least sharing the town. I think I'm disappointed that our recommendation to do that wasn't taken up on this opportunity, but I hope at the very least that's where we get to. Is there any thoughts on whether you could do that? Because I think that is one of the major issues.
Well, I can't confirm at this point because this is all, we go back and discuss all of this with the security team.
Okay, and the final question I wanted to clarify was there was no adverts, right? It was just a localised campaign on advertisement. Normally for PQT you have adverts across the tube.
We did.
We did have those?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was the same level of advertising as previous PQTs. Okay. The only difference was it didn't have the specific venue.
Okay, all right. No, I hadn't seen any, and in the report pack we said it said that it was going to be more of a localised media campaign as opposed to the wider one, so I didn't know whether that included the tube adverts.
That must have been a mistake in the report.
Exactly
it's the same. We run the same circuit every time. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all. I'm sure there's a lot that we will come back on as a committee to this item. I can't see any other hands, so you are free to leave, but always welcome to stay. Thank you both for staying with us this afternoon. I would like to, just to conclude that, and this one's a long one, unfortunately. Thanks for attending. Can I ask the committee to agree to respond to the proposed handling of the review recommendations, particularly on proposals relating to the following: security and safety, venue selection, event format, chair, and audience management? Thanks very much. Okay, moving on to the draft committee timetable. Assembly Member Russell, did you want to come in?
Oh, yes. I just wanted to check that if there are clashes with meetings like the TfL board or the policing board, and committees are going to be moved out into a committee room, that the timetable is set up so that it's not always the same committee that gets affected. There may be other views about the desirability or otherwise of committees being moved, but just to make sure that any impact of moves is not felt by one committee in particular.
Thank you. Assembly Member Baker.
Yeah, I'd like to raise the issue of security of committees when they are moved into committee rooms. I don't think it's adequate at this stage.
Thank you. And with all that noted, and possibly looking to report that back after discussion with group leads and the deputy chair, can I ask the committee to approve in principle the draft timetable of London Assembly and committee meetings for the 25 to 26 year? Noting that was a bad time to take a breath. Noting that the final programme of meetings is subject to related decisions by the London Assembly to be taken at the annual meeting in May 2025. Noted. Thank you. The Oversight Committee work programme, can I ask the committee to note its work programme for 24-25? Noted. And the date of the next meeting will take place on 22nd of January 2025 at 2 o'clock in City Hall. I know. And any other business? There is no any other business, so thank you very much for sticking with today, and I'll see you all tomorrow.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London